about the general situation in Sweden based on these three examples. If you're interested in a more comprehensive listing of anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist events and incidents in Sweden during 2009, I'd like to direct your attention to a forthcoming publication by Dr. Gerstenfeld in the Post-Holocaust and Anti-Semitism series that is published here at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Now, the three cases that I'm going to talk about are the Swedish reactions to Operation Cast Lead, the coming out as an Islamist by Muhammad Omar, and the Aftonbladet Affair, which I'm sure you all know about, but we'll get to that in a minute. First of all, I'd like to talk about Cast Lead, or rather the reactions in Sweden to this operation. As you know, Cast Lead was an Israeli military intervention in Gaza that started on December 27th last year and went on until mid-January roughly. Excuse me. During this time we saw an increase in anti-Semitic incidents in Sweden after a period of relative calm ever since the Second Lebanon War. This is a pattern that we can observe not only in Sweden but internationally in many countries, especially in Europe, whenever there's some kind of heating up of the situation here in the Middle East, this results in attacks on local Jews in Europe. The more serious ones in Sweden were especially an arson attack on the Jewish center in Helsingborg in southern Sweden, and 3 attacks on a burial chapel in the city of Malmö. Beyond that, there were also attacks on 2 pro-Israeli demonstrations in Malmö. During the first of these, there was a group of unauthorized counter-demonstrators that threatened the manifestation in support of Israel, and the police that didn't have sufficient forces at the scene was forced to disperse both the manifestation and the crowd that came to protest against it. A few weeks later, there was another pro-Israeli demonstration that was actually managed to hold the manifestation, but it was attacked with different kind of projectiles from violent counter-demonstrators, firecrackers and so forth. There were also several anti-Israeli demonstrations during Cast Lead in Sweden, and also the weeks that followed the operation itself. These demonstrations on many occasions went beyond just expressing support for the Palestinians and the suffering of the people in Gaza into quite hostile rhetoric against Israel. And there were people there expressing support for Hamas and Hezbollah as well, and at least at one instance in Stockholm there was the burning of an Israeli flag, and at another demonstration in Malmö some demonstrators were sporting portraits of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. And these weren't just marginal demonstrations, but rather main events with participation by the top brass of the Social Democratic Party. For instance, in Stockholm, at the demonstration with the flag burning, for instance, Mona Sahlin, the head of the Social Democratic Party, was there, and so was the former foreign minister Jan Eliasson, and the leader of the Swedish Trade Union Confederation, Lund University. Now, of course, they weren't holding these flags, but just to give an illustration of the fact that these were central events. Thank you. These demonstrations actually illustrate the point that there is a certain connection between political or ideological worldview in Sweden and one's attitude towards Israel. I haven't done any studies on it, so I can't tell you for sure whether this is a statistic connection or a causal combination. I leave that to your own judgment. However, we can see that there is at least a statistical correlation between pro-Palestinian or even anti-Israeli positions and a left-wing voting pattern. We can see this in these demonstrations where leading left-wing politicians participate, and on the other hand, we can see, if we look at the press, that there is support, or was support, expressed in the liberal and the conservative press, at least in the op-ed pages. Support for Israel, or at least understanding of Israel's position, and to a certain extent also for her actions in Gaza, or at least some of them. However, if you look at the press coverage of Operation Cast Lead in general in Sweden, it was clearly biased against Israel. A man called Roland Poirier Martinsson, who is the head of the Media Institute at Timbro, which is a Swedish think tank, he analyzed the 4 major dailies in Sweden, Dagens Nyheter, Svenska Dagbladet, the morning papers, and the 2 major evening papers, Aftonbladet and Expressen, and reached the conclusion that there was a clear anti-Israeli bias in the press, and that they could not live up to their own standards of objectivity and professionalism, or at least they didn't manage to do so in the coverage of Cast Lead. Taking into account the what I talked about earlier about the correlation between political worldview and positions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that might not be very surprising. A slightly more surprising, and to my view, rather disturbing consequence of Operation Cast Lead, or one of its reactions in Sweden, was the cancellation of Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremonies at the Diocese of Luleå in northern Sweden. The assistant vicar of the cathedral was quoted in a small Christian newspaper saying that it didn't feel appropriate to commemorate the Holocaust after Operation Cast Lead, because so many people had been upset about what Israel had done in Gaza. Now, in all fairness, it must be noted that the diocese was faced with quite a lot of criticism for this decision, which basically said they blamed Jews collectively, even Jews who had been killed before the State of Israel was established, for Israeli actions. Now, and this criticism also came from people who aren't traditionally friends of Israel. Nonetheless, I would say that it's a disturbing fact that this reflex exists. One of the best-known, internationally best-known reactions to Cast Lead in Sweden was probably the debacle surrounding the Davis Cup tie between Sweden and Israel that took place in the beginning of March 2009. The head of the Social Democratic Women's Association, Ingalill Bjartén, she, in an official statement in connection to Cast Lead, she compared Israel to Nazi Germany and said that this Davis Cup tie between Sweden and Israel should be cancelled. And the foreign policy spokesperson for the left party, Hans Linde, was also a member of parliament, went even further, saying that he called for a complete cultural boycott against Israel. Now, the city council of Malmö, where the game was supposed to take place, decided that they would go through with the tie, but it would be played without audience in the hall. And that's what happened. There were